Before we start this video, I should apologize to anyone who's offended by my use of this word bullshit. But incidentally, this is the very term that was used by 3 researchers at the University of Linköping in Sweden, where a paper was released recently that was titled Individual Differences in Susceptibility to Financial Bullshit. It's a topic our team here found amusing and interesting at the same time, and it's maybe something we don't think of enough. So what do we really mean by bullshit? Well, for starters, the word means some form of misrepresentation which is different from lying. What I mean is liars or lying is about giving wrong statements, but when someone bullshits, then that person really doesn't care if what he or she is saying is true or not. For example, in 2018, the then US President Donald Trump told the Canadian Prime Minister that the United States had a trade deficit with Canada. This was not true, but Trump's mindset was not of lying or deceiving the Canadian, but he had no idea if there was a deficit or not, and he was merely bullshitting. Other than politics, bullshit statements are very common in the workplace, which more often than not consists of vaguely relatable words that sound impressive, but which don't actually mean anything. For example, you might have heard statements like these in office meetings. Let's incubate some cross-platform interfaces, deliver turnkey partnerships, or let's repurpose sustainable solutions, etc. Similarly, social media platform like Twitter is another place which I think has an abundance of bullshitters. But coming to it from a financial perspective, think of a statement like, money eases the cost of those who borrow it. Let me repeat that. Money eases the cost of those who borrow it. Now, what the heck does this mean? Personally, I think it means absolutely nothing, but if you find this on Twitter or on LinkedIn, I won't be surprised if a few thousand educated people end up liking and retweeting this vague collection of words. Similarly, check out the statement, freedom and space transform the abstract meaning of money. Again, this phrase means nothing to me, and it's the detection and measurability of financial bullshit like this is what the academic study I referred to earlier was trying to find. In fact, the paper acknowledges that the field of finance is often portrayed as a complex and difficult area of decision making where interactions are commonly characterized by jargons, acronyms, and slogans. Further, the study goes on to say, and mark my words, the study says that young males with a high income and who are overconfident about their financial knowledge are most susceptible to financial nonsense. And surprisingly, per the authors, the people who are best able to detect financial bullshit and are not affected by impressive financial language were actually people at the other end of the spectrum, that is, older women with low incomes who were not overconfident of their financial expertise. Of course, one cannot generalize that all young men fall for financial gibberish, but a reasonable interpretation of the results does show that men are more easily impressed by financial jargons and statements. Additionally, it was also notable that one's level of education appeared to make no difference in the bullshit detection scale, and counterintuitively, the study also found that the higher a person is on the income scale, the more susceptible he or she is on being impressed by bullshit. This was honestly a bit surprising to me, but to some extent it does make sense. After all, if you have more disposable income, you might not be diligent on each and every investment as compared to a person who may have very little money to invest. So these were some of the main points that have been covered in that paper, and if this topic of financial bullshittery is new to you, hopefully you're finding this video useful. As a YouTuber and educator, I see the results of the study as a learning and will want to use what we have learned here in tweaking how one needs to communicate to different groups when helping them make better decisions about their finances. The idea of bullshitting as a way to get unsuspecting people to part with their money is a centuries-old idea which has only gotten bigger and meaner over time. We now have to contend with fake news, conspiracy theories, and of course financial products that are marketed and communicated using opaque and technical sounding language. Now the question is, how can investors be on their guard and spot financial nonsense when they hear it? In addressing this important question, we were able to find a framework for this which comes with a rather mischievous yet relevant name. And this method of managing bullshit is called the C.R.A.P framework, C.R.A.P. The C.R.A.P system was originally created to address workplace bullshit and stands on 4 pillars. The alphabet C stands for comprehend the bullshit, R for recognizing it, A is for act, and P is to prevent the bullshit. C, R, A, and P. Now let's go through each of these pillars and see how we can cut out the crap from our financial lives. So now that we have established that bullshit is not lying, one needs to first understand why people bullshit and why people happily buy into it. For instance, CEOs and especially those who come from a marketing or sales background have been known to use vague, complicated sounding words from time to time. Like, take the case of Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, who said this when announcing the coffee chain's newest roasteries. We aim to provide an immersive, ultra-premium, coffee-forward experience. Now, Schultz is definitely an astute businessman, very creative, very decisive, but it isn't difficult for you and me to comprehend that he was basically bullshitting here and trying to hide behind pretty words. On the listener's part, a large number of people tend to buy into that jumbled, mangled concoction of words under 3 conditions. That is, if it somehow helps them, or if it confirms something that they already believe in, or thirdly, if it makes them feel better about themselves. This last part, makes them feel better about themselves, can be particularly damaging for an investor because this effectively means that bullshit can even be perceived to be appealing for an investor, which makes the recognition of it all the more important. Now, when it comes to recognizing bullshit, the first rule is to expect it, which means you will encounter nonsense many times through the day, especially when watching a business channel or reading company announcements or when scrolling through Twitter, etc. So be prepared for it. And this nonsense can be in the form of abstract terms, vague phrases, catchy jargons, or even references to popular culture that make the bullshit seem more relatable and hence believable. For example, there was a time when all companies were referring to themselves as the Uber of something. The Uber of healthcare, the Uber of shipping, the Uber of education, etc. Honestly, 99% of those companies were basically bullshitting, and as an investor, it's our job to recognize the deceit behind it. A second way of recognizing bullshit is by quantifying it. And a good example of that was the Howard Schultz statement on giving an immersive, ultra-premium coffee experience, which were just some vague words and did not have any data or logic to it. The third and the most important step of the C.R.A.P methodology is to act, and there are many ways of doing it. The most passive way is to neglect or disengage from the bullshit, which is done by simply listening or reading the material and just moving on like you would do after watching an entertaining video or after reading a fiction novel. The idea should be to not even spend a second to ponder around it or to make any kind of mental notes. Secondly, and a more proactive act would be to exit or terminate your participation. This can include unfollowing that person's Twitter account or not reading some sections of the newspaper or unsubscribing to that YouTube channel, etc. Effectively, you moving the bullshitter out of your life. And the last and most direct way is to call out the bullshitter. Now, this doesn't have to be rude or confrontational, and sometimes a simple question does the job effectively. These can be questions like, where did you get this information from? Or by asking them to clarify on a certain jargon word, which should be enough to catch the bullshitter off guard and reveal the truth. And the fourth and final step in the C.R.A.P framework is to prevent. Now, as the old adage goes, prevention is better than cure. And in that context, it is important for you to create an environment where bullshitting is neither rewarded nor tolerated. In other words, don't allow any of the nonsense around you to play on your mind. And the more you can do it, you'll find it to be the most effective way of escaping it. Now, there are 4 tried and tested techniques that you can employ. Number 1 is to foster critical thinking and a questioning habit to your investing. So if someone says something that seems vague or unclear, don't be shy to ask more questions and probe deeper on the source, analysis, and the presentation of information. Technique number 2 is to stop using and receiving excessive jargon. So while the receiving part is fine, and we have already discussed it earlier in the video, I also mentioned the phrase using as well because we too are often guilty of some form of bullshitting, and catching ourselves in the act is a great way of improving our nonsense recognition skills. The third technique in our prevention strategy is to stay away from poorly organized committees and meetings, which in an investing setup could mean a panel discussion, Twitter spaces, and even a podcast. Of course, not all are bad, but personally, I find too many of them to be very long and jargonized. And the final prevention approach is to be evidence driven, which, as the term suggests, is to find out if there is any concrete evidence to support the bullshitter's words, which can be in the form of sources, written text, and numbers. Truth be told, the financial industry has its fair share of bad players who are not interested in straightforward and honest communication. They lie, they exaggerate, they amplify, and they most definitely bullshit a lot. But having said this, financial education, like what the ET Money YouTube channel does, is making a number of investors and consumers take note. I personally think we are going to see a lot more companies, promoters, and financial institutions realize that if more people understand what they are buying or getting into, it will lead to a lot more trust in the system, which will have a positive impact on the consumer and improve the company's bottom line. But perhaps all this should start from each one of us. And if you don't know something, be honest and simply say, I don't know. It's the most selfless and simple thing that one can do. And it's something I do, or at least I think I do, when replying to your comments on this YouTube channel. Point blank, if we have an answer, we'll answer it. And if we don't know it, we'll say we don't know. And with this, we come to the end of this video. Bullshitting is not a subject that's talked about much, which is sad because I think the financial world is full of it. I sincerely hope this video has given you something to think about. And if you liked it, then do subscribe to our channel, do like this video, and also share it with others. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to catching up with you next week on another insightful video. Until then.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.